Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Northborough Free Library's program called Faith Traditions in America. And this is our fourth and final program in the series. Can I just ask a show of hands, how many of you have been able to attend the prior series? Thank you. So, we started way back in September, and here we are. It's already in December, and of course you know that because it was about -1 out there. So I can't take credit for the cold weather, but it's great to see you, and thank you for coming out. Is the volume okay? Okay? Thank you. So tonight, the topic is how we celebrate holy days and their significance, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So we have three presenters, and we have Pastor Steve Georgeson from Rice Memorial Baptist Church, we have Shaheen Akhtar, and we have Rabbi Rachel Gurovitz from B'nai Shalom in Westborough. And each of them will be talking about their faith traditions, and we certainly have questions at the end. If any of you have any questions, we welcome them. We're going to be here until 8:15, 8:20, so we have plenty of time, and we welcome your participation. So, and I just wanted to say one other thing, and that is that this really started out as a suggestion by Steve. And Steve said to me, I've always wanted to do kind of a series about faith traditions in our community. And so I really want to thank Steve for recommending it and coming up with the idea, and Deborah Hirsch, our Adult Services Librarian, for helping out as well. So if there's interest, we may continue this type of a series in the spring. I have had some input, and some people have told me they desire to continue these types of discussions. So if there is an interest, we'll continue that kind of program in the spring as well. So again, thank you for coming, and please help me welcome our presenters here. And I'll let Shaheen start. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. A warm welcome to you all in this blustery cold night. Thank you, and thank you for attending all the four series. And Chris, thank you so much for organizing this. So in Islam, there are two holidays of profound significance, commonly known as Eid in Arabic, which means celebrations. Both the holidays are connected with the performance of duties in the service of our Creator and His creation. The Islamic year is based on a lunar cycle. God says in the Quran, the number of months is 12 according to God. In the decree of God, the day God created the heavens and the earth. Further, he says, it is He who has made the sun a source of radiant glory, and the moon a light reflected, and determined the lunar phases for it, so that you might know how to compute the years and to measure time. The lunar year is approximately 304 days long. So our holidays rotate backward through all the seasons, and they are not fixed to the Gregorian calendar. And Ramadan is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar. It is obligatory on all adult Muslims to fast during this month. This means abstaining from eating, drinking, smoking, and sexual activities during the fasting hours. Travelers and sick people may defer their fast and need to make it up for it later. This is one of the pillars of Islam. God says in the Quran, O you who believe, fasting is ordained on you as it was ordained on those before you, so that you may remain conscious of God. The ritual of fasting, as well as other rituals of Islam, were initially revealed to Prophet Abraham. We know that Prophet Moses and Prophet Jesus also fasted. Since Islam is the continuation of the same message, we follow the way of Abraham. Ramadan is a time for inner reflection, devotion to God, and self-control. The essence of Ramadan is about changing our ways to become a better person and to remain conscious of our Creator throughout our lives. If we just give up food and not make an effort to change, that would be negating the spirit of Ramadan. God says to fast is to do good unto yourself, if you only knew. There are many good things that come about fasting. For example, it helps to develop self-control, and we can overcome selfishness, greed, laziness, and other faults. Also, fasting helps us to understand a little better how blessed we are whenever we eat a meal. And we think about Ramadan as a yearly opportunity to refresh ourselves for carrying out our duties as upholders of the message of mercy and compassion. It is a time for unconditional forgiveness and mercy. It is a time of new beginnings. Ramadan symbolizes the month of revelation, the Quran. God revealed the first revelation of the Quran to Prophet Muhammad through Angel Gabriel during one of the nights in Ramadan. This night is called the night of power or the night of destiny. This night is an incredibly blessed night. Muslims all over the world spend the night in prayers and reading the Quran. Everyone feels overwhelmed with the feelings of gratitude for the gift of the Quran, and we pray for God's forgiveness and mercy. During Ramadan, Muslims take extra time out to read the Quran or listen to the recitation of the Quran. Mosques all over the world have special nighttime prayers where the memorizers of the Quran recite the verses, and by the end of Ramadan, the entire Quran is completed. And this completion coincides with the night of power. Everyone prays for everyone, especially the refugees and the oppressed, and for justice and peace in the world. The month of Ramadan is surrounded with a sense of generosity and gratitude. It is a time of giving and sacrificing. Although good deeds and charity is always important in Islam, they have special significance during Ramadan. Charity is one of the pillars of Islam. It is obligatory on every Muslim to give away 2.5% on their savings. And many people do that during Ramadan. In addition, if someone is not able to fast due to health reasons, they would have to feed someone needy for the days of the fast they miss, if they are able to afford it. This would make it easier on those who do not have food during Ramadan. So you can see that fasting and charity are closely related. By experiencing hunger and thirst, we can feel with the less fortunate, which helps us to become more compassionate. Almost all the charities they stay incredibly busy making sure that people have food during Ramadan. And many charities hold fundraisers, so we get to know the causes and people's sufferings in other parts of the world. God has created instruments for rediscovering humanity, and I think Ramadan is one of those instruments. During Ramadan, mosques stay open and serve fast-breaking meals. Also, friends and families hold fast-breaking gatherings. It is a very festive month. It is a time to renew our commitment for being connected with one another and standing strong in defense of our values of compassion, mercy, and unity of all. And as the Ramadan comes to an end, at the end, Muslims all over the world celebrate the festival of fast breaking, which is in Arabic Eid al-Adha. The Eid celebrates the fact that God gave us the gift of the Quran. The Eid also celebrates the great achievement of fasting for the whole month, which represents a personal victory of the spiritual person over his or her blind and unrestrained desires and sensual urges. On the day of Eid, we go to the mosque and offer special prayers in congregation and thank God for his blessings. So essentially, Eid is a day to thank God for his blessings and a day of family and friends. We begin this day with our obligation to share and care for the less fortunate by making a small donation so they would have enough food the day of the celebration. One of my fondest memories from my childhood is the day of Eid. And people would come to our house and I would give out food or grain, clothes, or money, and my father would bring dolls. So working for compassion, mercy, and unity of all mankind, this is what Ramadan stands for. And after Ramadan, in the 12th month, we celebrate the festival of sacrifice, which is in Arabic called Eid al-Adha. The word Adha comes from a root word which means illumination or light. It is through sacrifice that we are in fact illuminated. This celebration takes place after the end of pilgrimage, in Arabic called the Hajj. And when the Hajj is done in the Makkah, but Muslims all over the world join the pilgrims in celebrating the completion. Hajj is an obligation on every Muslim once in their lifetime, if they have health and financial resources, to make the pilgrimage to the Kaaba. We believe that Kaaba is the most ancient house of worship built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. Every year, over 3 million Muslims from every corner of the globe gather there to reaffirm their faith that there is no God but God, our Creator. The sacrifice, the idea of sacrifice is at the heart of Hajj. And during Hajj, we remember Prophet Abraham's family and his family's sacrifices. This holiday also commemorates the great act of devotion demonstrated by our patriarch Abraham in his willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael. Instead of allowing Abraham to sacrifice his son, God revealed a lamb. In this remembrance, we sacrifice a lamb and to be given in a feast to the poor and the family and friends. But it is the sacrifice of ourselves that should come to our mind. And Eid is a reminder for that. The sacrifice symbolizes obedience to God, and its distribution to others is an expression of generosity, which is one of the pillars of Islam. So each day is a day of great achievement for the faithful believer who observes the duties associated with it. The Quran teaches us to live our lives with the spirit of Ramadan and Hajj. Prophet Muhammad said, "The heart of a believer is the throne of compassion." That is the throne of God. And it should be our lifetime goal to keep trying to reach that throne. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. here to keep an eye on how long I talk for. So I'm going to try and cover quite a broad overview of the Jewish holy days to give a sense of the sort of structure and some of the thinking behind them and the evolution of them. Because all of our festivals are, it's a little bit like going on an archaeological dig. When you say, what is this festival and what does it mean? It's well, which century shall we start in? And really, if we start with sort of the basic essence, looking at this more as from an anthropological point of view, feasts, holy days at their very essence are about the human need to express gratitude, joy, ask for forgiveness. They are expressing something about human beings trying to maintain a sense of relationship and balance in the world. Sometimes environmentally, the earth, particularly ancient civilizations, and the dependence on the earth to produce the food that sustains us, but also a sense of ongoing connection with God and with each other. And so as a result, you find that almost every religious tradition has holy days, and many of those holy days are ones that evolved from some pre-existing tradition, and Judaism is certainly no exception. So for many of our holidays, and I'll highlight some of these examples, you'll find that what we observe today and what became core Jewish holidays are built on earlier layers of more agriculturally earth-based, some would say pagan-based observances, and they evolve and they change over time. We have what they look like in temple times, when the temple stood in Jerusalem. We have how the rabbis had to reinvent the observances and the symbolism around some of those festivals once the temple was destroyed. And then we have, through the centuries, adaptations and changes and modern interpretations, so that in every generation the festival continues to have relevance and meaning for the people who are continuing to observe and celebrate. We also have, in terms of structure in Jewish holy days, major and minor holy days. And that's an important distinction. I'm going to start with the major ones and then come to the minor ones, because I think when you see holy days listed on a calendar, if you're not of the Jewish faith, you don't really know the difference between one or the other, and sometimes there are incorrect assumptions made about which ones are the most important, just based on when they fall and what they're close to. For example, tonight is the second night of Hanukkah. Nice t-shirt, sweatshirt representation there. But a lot of people think that's a very important holiday because it often falls so close to Christmas, and Christmas is, well, here is a very important holiday in the Christian faith. But Hanukkah is a minor holiday in the Jewish faith, and I'll say more about that at the end. So let's start with the high holy days. People often hear that phrase, the high holy days, the most important of the Jewish holy days. They are Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And we, like the Muslim faith, we also have a lunar calendar, but our lunar calendar is adjusted because all of our festivals, our primary festivals, which I will come on to next, were connected originally with seasons and agricultural rites. They have to fall at the right season. So we can't have a springtime festival celebrating the new lambs fall in December. So we can't rotate around the year the way that in the Muslim faith that's part of the structure, and because so many of the festivals are connected to the life of the Prophet and the
actually, they are not.
But the Quran, the completion of the Quran, they're not seasonally connected, so they can.
The lunar months are connected to seasons. The spring, Rabiul Awwal, and Ramadan is the hot month, thirst.
Right.
Yes.
But it continues to go around.
But they are not fixed.
Right. So. What we do is we have calculated into the calendar an additional month. So a leap year for us is not an additional day, it's an additional month. It falls a certain number of times within the 17-year cycle, and it allows us to readjust where our festivals fall so that we stay seasonally aligned. But that is why sometimes you hear, the Jewish New Year falls at the beginning of September or the end of September, because there's about a 3.5 week variation. And sometimes Hanukkah falls right in Christmas week, and sometimes it's at the very beginning of December for the same reasons. So the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is really the central day. That is the holiest day of the year. It is a day of fasting from sundown until the following sundown, 25 hours. It's recorded biblically. It's a day of fasting. It's a day of doing repentance, reflecting on one's deeds. Really, we heard about an entire month, Ramadan, and we have this day. It's not really a single day because it's the end of a 10-day period that's meant to be introspective, reviewing our deeds, reflecting on our year, trying to make amends with people we've wronged, and trying to establish for ourselves the desire, the will to do better the following year. And those 10 days come after an entire month in which that period of reflection is meant to have begun. But there's no other ritual connected to it until we get to Yom Kippur. So the fast day itself is a day when people abstain from work. They are in synagogue for a good part of the day. They are with family. And the ritual is one in which there's self-reflection, but there's also communal reflection. So some of the sins that are reflected upon are ones we do as a society. We take responsibility for each other. And so there's a communal piece to that. Rosh Hashanah is actually the Jewish New Year that takes place 10 days earlier. The way it looks today is really something that didn't come about and take full form until the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE, and we were in exile in Babylonia. And in Babylonia, there was celebrations of an annual celebration of recoronating the emperor. And so we actually took a lot of the influence from Babylonia and said, well, if they have these rituals and ways of sort of recoronating their king, well, we have the King of Kings, the ultimate ruler of all. And so that became the model. And there's ritual and prayers that are structured around that theme. There's the ritual of hearing the sounding of the shofar, and which is the ram's horn, which is described in the Torah for special occasions, for making announcements. And then there's a later addition of a ritual of dipping apples in honey to represent wishing each other a sweet new year. Mm-hmm. So those are the high holy days. The three festivals that are most tied to these agricultural origins were originally in temple times. They were the three pilgrimage festivals. The 3-foot festivals in Hebrew, Shalosh Regalim, and they were times when people were meant to bring their offerings to the temple in Jerusalem. So there's Passover, which is Pesach. Passover falls in the springtime, and that was a time when you brought a lamb for sacrificial offering. Each household was meant to bring one, and if you couldn't afford a lamb for your own household, you would share it with other households, and together the lamb would be roasted. Some of the insides would be offered as the offering, but then you would eat the lamb. That would be the celebration. And then the abstaining from eating leavened bread, eating only unleavened bread, otherwise known as matzah, for 7 days. That was also in the Bible, and that was part of the ritual. So what we have here actually are two earlier observances. If you were the kind of farmer that wandered around with your sheep, you would give thanks to the first new lambs of the season by sacrificing a lamb. If you were growing crops, you would give thanks for the crops that sustained you. And in fact, Passover would come at the time where you would be cleaning out the leftovers of the grains from the previous harvest, because 7 weeks later would be the next festival, Shavuot, which is a harvest festival, when you would be bringing in the new grains, and you wouldn't want old grains that could get moldy or fermented to cause infection or disease. So that clearing out, that's part of the origins of why our festival is the way it is. But that's not the story of Passover that people hear today. Today people hear the story of Passover as celebrating the Exodus from Egypt. And that is indeed a part of the holiday and the festival. It's a slightly later layer. And if you look closely at the Bible and the description of the Exodus from Egypt, you can actually identify where this part of the meaning of the holiday got inserted. It's in the middle of the explaining of the 10 plagues in Egypt, right before the last plague. There's like, here's a break from the action, and we're going to tell you about this festival that you're going to have from now on to remember this historical event that we're describing for you. It's like, it's very clearly a difference in style of writing, and it's an insertion, but that becomes a later meaning. When we no longer have a temple, the rabbis with all of these festivals have to come up with other ways of observing. We don't sacrifice a lamb when there's no temple to sacrifice at. Sacrifice stops the moment the second temple was destroyed in 70 CE. And instead, over time, they evolved the ritual of the Passover Seder. Many of you may have heard of that. That is an evening of ritual that takes place in the home, and it's a ritual that was based on the Greek symposium and Roman banquets. These were considered to be high art forms of philosophy, of exploring and investigating ideas, and the idea that was being explored was freedom. What does it mean to be free, to experience redemption? And when they were not free, when they were under the oppression of the Romans, the Roman banquet was the symbol of freedom and luxury. And so some of the symbols and some of the things that we eat and some of the way the evening unfolds is based on those experiences of that time. But out of it came a new narrative. And over the centuries, that basic idea of this is the festival of freedom, as opposed to specifically a festival of springtime or lambs or agriculture, that got replaced, this festival of freedom. So if you get to the 20th century, you see that there are many different types of Haggadahs, the books that we use to go through the Seder, and other contemporary themes of freedom were added. So there are civil rights Seders, there are feminist Seders, and there are environmental Seders. From the 1960s onwards, people started to add themes so that this idea of freedom wasn't just about our own story, it was about redemption and freedom for other oppressed groups, and that got worked into our ritual. I mentioned Shavuot, which is 7 weeks after Passover. That was an agricultural festival. But what happens when you get sent into exile and over the centuries you find yourself living in countries that won't let Jews own land? In Europe, we couldn't own land, so we couldn't be farmers. But we have a Bible that says you have to observe these holidays forever. And so, again, there was rabbinic innovation. So if Passover represents the exodus from Egypt, then it's about 7 weeks later that we would find ourselves, according to the narrative of the Bible, at Mount Sinai experiencing revelation. And so added to the agricultural origins of Shavuot was we remember receiving the Ten Commandments and the experience of revelation at Mount Sinai. Fast forward to the 20th century, and in American Reform Judaism, they made a connection between receiving revelation and affirming our sense of who we were as a Jewish people at Mount Sinai, with an opportunity for our teenagers to affirm their Jewish identity. So borrowing from the Protestant form in the early 20th century, Reform Judaism introduced confirmation. And so confirmation for our 15, 16-year-olds takes place usually on Erev Shavuot. There's one other harvest festival, that's Sukkot. That takes place a little bit after Yom Kippur, just a few days after. And again, that was originally a harvest festival. The building of booths were for all of the extra workers that would come and work the fields, so they'd have shelter at night. And at the end of the harvest, they'd throw a big party. We have another layer. Now the booth, the temporary booth that we erect, reminds us of our wandering in the wilderness and of the fragility of life. And so we have other layers that get added to that symbolism. So those are pilgrim festivals. The minor holidays, I'm just going to mention two because I'm down to my final minute. So Purim. Purim is a minor holiday. It's a holiday when we read the book of Esther. It's Jewish Mardi Gras. It takes place towards the end of the winter. It's a time of celebrating and carnival and everything turned upside down. It's actually very similar to Mardi Gras. If you look at the history of Mardi Gras, it's an oppressed people imagining the world turned upside down and imagining that they're in charge and in control. And that's really what it was for the Jewish people as well, with the book of Esther. And it's a minor holiday in that You don't have to abstain from work. You don't, there's everything. Life goes on as normal. There's no other rules about what you can and can't do, but there is an opportunity to come together to celebrate the holiday. And the same is true of Hanukkah. So here we are in Hanukkah, and it's my time. Good timing. And in Hanukkah, we find ourselves celebrating the miracle of the Maccabees who fought against the Syrian Greeks in the 160s BCE and took back Jerusalem and the temple. The temple had been dedicated to Zeus. There was a lot of assimilation of Greek culture, and they re-established Judaism in Jerusalem through this miraculous victory of this very small band of people against this huge empire and its army. Later on, the rabbis added another story. It's not there in the book of Maccabees, if you read it in the Apocrypha. The story of the miracle of a small amount of oil that was found in the temple that was only enough to last really one day, but they needed to send somebody to get more oil and bring it back, and miraculously the oil lasted for 8 days. And so we celebrate for 8 days and we light the candles. In the book of Maccabees, the reason why we celebrate for 8 days is because they were fighting a war during the festival of Sukkot, which is one of those harvest festivals that lasts 8 days. And so they postponed the celebration of the holiday. And so they had their 8-day festival at Hanukkah time instead and made that a new festival. Hanukkah literally means the celebration of rededication, because the temple was rededicated. And that symbol of the miracle of the oil, the rabbis gave us as a way of de-emphasizing the military victory, because at the time when they lived under the Romans, every time people tried to rebel against the Romans, it was a horrible, oppressive crush. And so instead they said, we want you to have hope in dark times. And that became the universal message of Hanukkah that has really carried with us ever since. So I will end. I'm a few seconds over my 15 minutes. But let me take this opportunity, as I said, we are in the festival of Hanukkah, to just briefly mention something that may be of interest to people in this group. On Saturday night, the 5th night of Hanukkah, our congregation is hosting an interfaith event called Light. And it's a celebration and a conversation. So instead of you sitting here listening to people like us, the first hour will be an interfaith concert. The second part of the evening is an opportunity to sit in circles with people of all different faiths and learn about each other. And it's free, and it's from 7 o'clock onwards. And we will have participation from Jewish and Christian and Muslim and Hindu and Sikh members of the community from several towns. So come speak to me at the end if you want to get more information about that.
I love hearing about these traditions. I've learned a lot from both of you tonight myself. I'm going to take a little bit different approach for the first few moments of my time. I'm going to read a little story that Paul Harvey read on his radio show, and I'm hoping it'll give a little sense of what Christmas is. So I'm going to start with Christmas, and I'll talk about Easter, from Good Friday to Easter. So here's a story that he spoke about. It's about 1 page long, so it won't take too long. I wish I had 15 minutes. Could you put it? It's a little countdown timer she has there. So I'm going to start
I'm
now.
watching too.
So it's called The Man and the Birds. Now the man to whom I'm going to introduce is not a Scrooge. Oops, excuse me. He was a kind, decent, and mostly good man, generous to his family, and upright in his dealings with other men. But he just didn't believe all the incarnation business about Christianity. And he didn't want to observe Christmas except for the Christmas traditions. It just didn't make sense to him, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He just couldn't swallow the Jesus story about God coming to earth as man. I'm truly sorry to distress you, he told his wife, but I'm not going to go with you to church to see Christmas Eve. He said he'd feel like a hypocrite, and he'd much rather just stay home but that he'd wait up for them. And so he stayed, and they went to the midnight service. Shortly after the family drove the car away, the snow began to fall. And he went to the window to watch the flurries getting heavier and heavier, and then went back to his fireside chair. He did what I like to do, sit down in front of the fireplace with my dog and my Afghan and my wife. And he began to read his newspaper. Minutes later, he was startled by a thumping sound, and then another and another. And the sort of thump or thud, he thought at first it was somebody throwing snowballs. But when he went to the front door to investigate, he found a flock of birds huddled miserably in the snow. They'd been caught in the storm, and they were in desperate search for a shelter. And they had tried to fly through the large landscape window that he had. But he couldn't let the poor creatures lie there. He had a heart for animals. He couldn't let them lie there and freeze. So he remembered the barn where his children stabled their pony. That would provide warmth and protection for the birds. So quickly he put on his coat and galoshes and trampled through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the door wide and turned on the light, but the birds didn't come in. He figured food would entice them, so he hurried back to the house, got some breadcrumbs, and sprinkled them along the path to the barn. He opened the door wide to the barn, but to his dismay, the birds just ignored the breadcrumbs and the open door and the light and the warmth. And they lay there helplessly, flapping in the snow. He tried to catch them. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around and flailing his hands around. And all it did was scatter them in every direction. And then he realized that they were afraid of him. To them, he reasoned, I'm a strange and terrifying creature. If only I could think of some way to let them know that they can trust me, that I'm not trying to hurt them, but trying to help them. But how? Because any move he made tended to frighten the birds and confuse them. They would just not follow. They would not be led or shooed because they feared him. And then he had a revelation. He said, if only I could become a bird. If only I could become a bird and mingle with them and speak their language, then I could tell them not to be afraid, that there's a refuge from all the suffering that they're experiencing. I could show them the way to the safe, warm barn, and I would have to be one of them so they could see and hear and understand me. At that moment, the church bells began to ring. And the sound reached his ears above the sounds of the wind, and he stood there listening to the bells pealing and glad tidings of Christmas, and he sank to his knees in the snow. And that's exactly what Christmas is. It's God seeing us in our struggles, in our confusion, in our attempts to save ourselves, to get out of the horrible conditions that mankind, that humankind is in. And God, like this man wanted to do, God became one of us. Jesus is known in the prophet Isaiah. He was referred to as Emmanuel, God with us. Emmanuel is Jewish, Hebrew for God with us. And that's what Jesus, they said he would be Emmanuel, God with us. And Jesus is God in the flesh, who came to help us to save us, to bring us to protection from all that this world assails us with. So I love the story of Christmas. It's a wonderful demonstration of God's love for people. It is prophesied in the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament. I have 10 prophecies here. I won't go through them right now because it would take too long. But there are about 10 or more prophecies from the Old Testament that that prophesied that Jesus would be coming. Now, there are sort of real-life metaphors. I don't know if that's a proper term, but there's, in the Old Testament of the Bible, there are events that happened that were fulfilled when Jesus was on the earth. I'll get into them more when I start talking about Easter. But when we take the whole, the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see that there are common threads running all the way through it. And we talked last month, I wasn't on the panel, but we talked last month about how we got the Bible. It was 40 authors over different cultures, different languages, different times. Over the course of about 1,500 years, the Bible was written. From Moses in the first 5 books of the Bible up through Revelation, the Apostle John. And there's about 1,600 years between that. And 40 authors, 66 books of the Bible, of the Christian Bible. And there's all a common theme, and that you can see Christ. Christians can see Christ in the Old Testament, and Christ is hidden in the Old Testament, and he's revealed in the New Testament. And the story of Christmas is when he, who we believe is God in the flesh, when God cloaked himself in human flesh, and he was born as a baby in humble circumstances to live and grow, and he came to earth. He was born as a baby just to die for sinful mankind and to redeem sinful mankind. One distinctive between Christianity and the faith of my colleagues here is there was talk about sacrifice and duties, and that for the Christian that was accomplished by Jesus Christ. He was the sacrifice. He is the sacrificial lamb that we heard, I believe both faiths talked about in their holidays. They would serve lamb, either sacrifice lamb, serve a lamb, feed others, food which may include lamb. Well, Christians call Jesus our sacrificial lamb, the Lamb of God. You may have heard that. There are songs, it's referenced in the Bible many times, that he is the Lamb of God. So he came, he lived a perfect life. He was that spotless lamb. And there's a little difference between Islamic belief about Abraham. Islam believes Abraham sacrificed Ishmael, or was preparing to sacrifice Ishmael. The Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, believe that Abraham brought Isaac up to be sacrificed. That's where I guess the faiths began to separate at that point. But Jesus is known as the sacrificial lamb, and he was born, which we celebrate on Christmas. He was born, God with us. The only way that God could, that mankind could deal with sin is to have somebody outside of mankind pay the price for sin. So we don't, Christianity doesn't observe any sacrifices. We aren't obligated to keep any duties, because we believe that Christ accomplished all the requirements to make us right again with a holy God. Oh, that took 10 minutes. Yikes, okay. The story took a long time. Maybe I should have just...
I love the stories.
Thank you. So let me get to, so Jesus was born, we don't know exactly when it was. We celebrated on December 25th. Nobody really knows when it was. December 25th is as good a day as any, so we celebrate it then. But it's a time when, again, God came as a human, in human form, totally God, total deity, and totally human, both natures. And then he lived, and I spend my whole adult life now teaching about Jesus and what he did between his birth and his crucifixion and resurrection. But the other holiday we celebrate, which is one of our high holidays, is Easter, what we call Easter. I don't like that term necessarily, but it's a term we've come to know the holiday for. And it is born out of Passover. The rabbi commented on the Exodus and the Passover, where the night, that last plague, when since Pharaoh didn't let the people go, the Hebrew people go, God said, I'm going to kill all the firstborn sons as just to get you to move to let my people go. But he said for the Jewish people, if they sacrificed a lamb, put the blood on the door, on the top and the sides of the door, that the spirit of death would pass over that house, and that death would not come upon them. So for the Christian, we believe that Christ is our Passover lamb, that his blood, when he shed his blood on the cross, when the nails went through the hands and his side was cut and the nail through the foot, that blood was the sacrifice that fulfilled the Passover sacrifice. And when we believe in that, when we believe and put our faith in that, then the spirit of not physical death, because everyone dies, everyone has always died, it has a 100% success rate, but our spiritual death, we won't spiritually die. We won't be, death is more separation than ceasing to exist. And spiritual death is separation from God. And when we believe in Jesus Christ and the work he did on that cross, shedding his blood, which is on Good Friday we celebrate it. Many churches meet in the afternoon or the evening and celebrate Good Friday, because that's the time our sins were paid for. And death, when we believe in that, our sins will not result in death. They will be forgiven. And when Jesus shed that blood satisfied the wrath of God against evil, because God cannot accept evil. He cannot coexist with evil or sin or anything that's not perfectly holy. And we are not perfectly holy. I hope you agree with that. I know I certainly am not. But the blood of Christ, when shed, is our Passover lamb. And when we believe in that, then we can have that union with God, because our sins are forgiven. That blood wipes out the wrath of God against the sin that's on our account. So our sin has been canceled out. The penalty for our sin is canceled out at the cross. Now, the Old Testament, they would sacrifice animals. And then the problem with that is they would sacrifice an animal, the priest would lay his hand on the lamb or the animal, the sins of the people would be imputed upon that lamb, and they'd slay the lamb. I hope I'm getting this right. And their sins would be forgiven. The problem is that lamb stayed dead. And then they'd have to do it again the next year and again the next year. With Jesus Christ being the Passover lamb, he did die, and his blood was shed, and he died for the forgiveness of sins. The difference is Christ rose again on the third day. So we have a lamb, a sacrificial lamb, a Passover lamb that is living. We believe Christ is alive today. So for Christians, we share many of the same traditions as both faiths. The difference with Christianity is that God came in flesh, in human flesh, lived among us, died for us, for the things that separate us from God. He died for us, and he rose again. And we celebrate the resurrection Easter Sunday, the fact that the tomb is empty, that he rose again, that God rose him from the dead by his power, which is evidence that God accepted the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. If God said, well, it wasn't good enough, your death wasn't good enough, there's still some sin in you, if that were the case, Jesus never would have been resurrected. But since he rose again, the tomb was empty. The women went to the tomb, they found it empty. The angel said, what are you looking for? The one you seek isn't here. He rose. He is risen. And then Jesus was seen several times after the resurrection by hundreds of people, according to the Bible. So, I guess I'll have to stop. I have one other good story to tell, but I think we can stop it and we can take questions if we're ready.
Okay. Boy, thank you. And let's give Steve a hand, too. Thank you, Steve. So I'm sure there's lots of questions, and please, don't be shy. I feel like, it's so interesting, like in church, nobody's sitting in the front row, right? That's but
Baptist churches.
That's right. So anyone have a question, please, about any of the faith traditions? Well, I have a question, Shaheen. So the pilgrimage, and it is the desire, the goal for everyone to
Everyone's
go on
desire.
the pilgrimage
Right.
during their life. Is there a smaller pilgrimage?
Yes.
Can you
there
talk
is,
about that?
The smaller pilgrimage is you can go anytime. Anytime you can go, and it is like it's like visiting the Kaaba and praying there. But with the Hajj, you are with other Muslims, over 3 million Muslims coming together. It's like it's such a big retreat or a gathering. And it's a totally different feelings. And only only the pilgrim who goes there can describe. It's just so incredible. It is so inspirational that you are with people from every corner of the globe gathered there just for one purpose, to declare that, God is our creator and we are here for you and to, in your service. And the Hajj symbolizes the true equality of man. When Malcolm X went on Hajj, he saw something for the first time in his life which he had only dreamed of, that he was standing with people blue-eyed and white skin, brown skin, black skin, everyone, people of all colors and all social status, stood together to worship the one God. And he felt for the first time in his life as equal to others. And the most important part of the pilgrimage is that all pilgrims gather on this plain, which is called Plain of Arafat. That's where the Mountain of Mercy is, and that's where the Prophet Muhammad gave his farewell sermon. And he emphasized in his sermon that every person is created equal, and no one has superiority over another human being. And also, one of the rites of pilgrimage is that every pilgrim walks between the hills where Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, walked frantically searching for water when baby Ishmael was crying with thirst. So for me, as a woman and a mother, it is gratifying to know that, all pilgrims honor her and remember her struggle and her faith in God. And this justice and equality of all mankind is so important in this in Islam and in this particular festival. And for Hagar, the Quran does not call Hagar a slave woman. The Quran gives equal status to Hagar and Sarah as Abraham's wives, and Isaac and Ishmael as his sons. And as Steve mentioned that, in Christianity, there's a binding of Isaac, but in ours it's Ishmael. We believe that was the oldest son who was commanded to be sacrificed. And Genesis also in chapter 22 states that take your son, the only son. So the only son refers to Ishmael because at the time he was the only one. And Ishmael was born after 13 years later, where Abraham was 100 years old. And this sacrificing a lamb is nothing about any sacrificing. It is just that remembering that sacrifice and thinking about what can we sacrifice for other people and in the service of God and the service to his creation. That is the idea behind that. And again, it is to be given to the poor in the feast. And there's so much inequality and injustice in this world. Some people only get to eat meat once a year when the charities distribute this meat. So this is a feast for them. It's a sharing generosity, and sacrifice is a symbol of, it symbolizes obedience to God. So there's a great lesson in this festival. And the lesson conveyed here is twofold, that God is merciful, just, and created everyone equal. And the proof of our devotion to Him is to practice that justice, equality, and kindness for all people, regardless of their color. Thank you.
There you go.
You clearly said that in the Muslim faith, men and women are supposed to be equal, correct?
Yes.
It seems as though I've heard, maybe incorrectly, that in many Muslim countries, women do not have the right to drive, etc.
Right.
Could you address that a bit?
Yes. So this is very cultural. Quran never says, or anywhere, nothing is written that women cannot drive. It is some idea they have. It's only Saudi Arabia, that government, they have this very lame idea that I am sorry for the lack of. Right, and they have changed it. Finally, they have, they have changed it. And also, I wanted to bring the example of the one of the rights of Hagar, how women are held in honor, which is contrary to what you see in some of the cultures, how women are treated. It is not because of Islam. It is in spite of what they are supposed to be doing, and which is, very, very unfortunate.
Do you feel a struggle to help people to understand what is the true teachings of
Yes,
Islam?
it is a very
Because
big struggle, yes.
I'm hearing kind of different things than what one hears in the media.
Exactly. So people have to distinguish between the cultural practices and the true teachings of Islam. And people, when you are, mixing it up, then there's a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you that was a good question.
Anyone else? Everybody's shy. Okay. I'll ask another question, if I may, then, of Rabbi Gorovitz. So can you talk a bit, if you will, about the difference between the Orthodox and the Reformed, and in terms of the faith traditions around the holidays? Can you talk a bit about how
Yes.
those differences?
In terms of what the festivals are and what they symbolize, the core observances of them, there really are no differences.
Okay.
One of the primary differences is that because of the connection to the lunar calendar, that in ancient times, when a new month came around, there would have to be a sighting, and the sighting would be declared, and that would set the calendar in place. So once Jews moved beyond Israel, even beyond Babylonia, and spread, because of the uncertainties of exactly what those movements and the moon and where it was relative to Jerusalem, where that lay, in a number of these festivals, an additional day was added. So you'll sometimes hear a festival, like I said, Passover 7 days. So if you are Orthodox or conservative, you observe Passover for 8 days. But in the Reform movement, particularly in modernity, where we know exactly what the calendar is and when things fall, we don't find that historical reasoning is relevant anymore, and so we follow Israel, and it's a 7-day holiday. So those are the primary things. And then there's cultural things, so that, I said that there are major holidays, and major holidays are meant to be days where you completely abstain from work, and that you don't do ordinary everyday activities. You will find that in most Reformed congregations, the majority of people will observe that for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the holiest days of the year. But when it comes to, they'll have a Passover Seder, but when it comes to the first day of Passover, which should be a day of abstaining from work, living in a secular culture where if you took off every day from work and your workplace counts that as a day of vacation, and it doesn't recognize it as something else, you could easily use up all of your paid days of vacation taking off these festival days. So if you're Orthodox, that's what you'll do, or you'll work in a field, you'll work in a way that enables you to practice in that way. But those aren't Reformed traditions to do it differently. It's just that culturally, outside of Israel, people will adapt to the situation that they find themselves in. But those are really the only significant differences.
I have a question for the Reverend. I'm a Muslim by religion, but I went to a parochial school growing up. So, within the Catholic tradition, there are many, many different religious days, if you will. I don't see that within the Protestant church. So could you kind of elaborate on some of that?
Many different, what, I'm sorry?
Protestants.
Holy days.
Holy
Many
days.
different holy days, yeah.
I believe, I'm not terribly familiar with the Catholic. I grew up around Catholics all my life. And we do share, the Western Church, the Catholics and Protestants, do observe the Easter holiday on the same Western calendar. It's the 365-day calendar. I grew up Greek Orthodox, and the Orthodox celebrate it according to the Jewish calendar, the lunar calendar. The Orthodox celebrate Easter, I believe it's the first full moon after the beginning of Passover, I think it is.
That's a week after,
So,
I think. A week after?
I think it might be. I thought it was the first full moon after the beginning of Passover, which could be any.
Passover begins.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what. Thank you.
Because Passover begins on the full moon.
I learned that after I left the Greek Orthodox Church and became Protestant. But so that's one difference. That Christmas time, some Orthodox celebrate not the birth of Christ, but the revelation of Christ to the Gentiles, or some would say that it's when the wise men came to the child, which is like the January 6th, 7th, and around there. But generally, all the holidays are the same as far as I can understand.
Anyone else? So, I guess I'm going to monopolize some time. So I had another question.
Chris?
I grew up Irish Catholic, and we celebrated Christmas and Easter, but I had Jewish friends that were in blended families, and I guess in America, I don't know about other countries, in some families they celebrate both Christmas and Hanukkah. And I just wondered if, Rabbi Garvitz, if you had any experience with that kind of blending of, I guess, maybe the secular and the cultural and the faith.
So I'll speak from within the experience within our community, because somebody who is affiliated with the Jewish community, but attends a synagogue and is raising their children as Jews, are making a decision to make Judaism the primary faith of the home. And we certainly have a very significant percentage of interfaith households in our congregation. So what we'll find is that in a small percentage of them, you have one adult who is a practicing Christian, and so they are celebrating, and their family will, they may or may not accompany them to church if they're church going, but they'll certainly, in terms of the cultural expressions, want to facilitate that adult celebrating their holiday. But it's very clear in the household that it's dad's holiday or it's mom's holiday. What's more likely to be the case with the majority of people who affiliate with our congregation is that somebody might have grown up in the Christian faith, and so there is a cultural familiarity and joy in bringing the lights or putting up a tree, and so that comes in. But they're not church going, and they're not connecting to the deep faith-based meaning of the holiday. What they may do is go and celebrate with their in-laws, with relatives for a Christmas Day meal. But in terms of there is outside of our congregation, there are people out there who have a true desire that they're going to do both. When we're raising kids and educating them within our congregation and raising them with Jewish identity, there's an incompatibility in doing both, because you cannot both say that Jesus is and is not the Messiah simultaneously. There comes a point where you have to make a choice and to ground, in terms of religious education, to ground a child in one thing, even if later on in life they are pulled to choose a different thing. So there's the incompatibility of truly doing both, but culturally there are ways in which no one who's raising a child Jewish who has a Christian family member would say, you cannot be part of those cultural celebrations. That's not how we do. There's another very important principle in Judaism, which is shalom bayit, peace in the home, and so you play nice with your relatives, and there's no harm in that whatsoever.
I was always jealous of my Jewish friends because sometimes they got gifts at Christmas, and then they had gifts 8 days, over the Hanukkah period. So they got more gifts. Please.
So I just wanted to add a little bit. Some of you must be wondering why Muslims do not celebrate Christmas. I cannot be a Muslim if I don't believe in Jesus, peace be upon him, as one of the greatest messengers of God. And we believe that, Jesus' mother Mary, actually there is a chapter in the Quran, and she is the only woman, the whole chapter is dedicated on her name, and the chapter is called Maryam, which is an Arabic name for Mary. And she has been given the highest honor in the women of all nations. That is from the Quran I'm quoting. So we do not celebrate birthdays. In some cultures, Prophet Muhammad's birthdays, people gather around and reflect on his life, or would sing some poetry in his honor. And as we all know, nobody knows the real birth date of Jesus, peace be upon him, and that was a pagan festival, sun god, which was added to Christianity. And so in Islam, the foundation of Islam is to believe in the oneness of God. God is our creator. He is the Lord. He is the sustainer of all the worlds. So anything which compromises that oneness of God part is we cannot be part of that, because we do not associate anyone or anything in the worship of God. So we actually, in our prayers, we would read the verses of the Quran from chapter Maryam, which has the story of the birth of Jesus, peace be upon him. But for us, no one is divine except our Creator. So that's why. But we are, it's it's a tradition, our Christian friends' tradition. So we respect that. Like I said, I cannot be a Muslim if I say, so we cannot pick and choose. I cannot say, about Moses, we believe in Exodus because there's a whole chapter in the Quran. So Islam is the same message, starting from the creation of Adam, and going through all the lines of messengers. And Prophet Muhammad was the one chosen to redirect people to the oneness of God. And so God says that surrender unto me it should be the way of your life. So surrendering meaning Islam. That is the Arabic word, submission to our Creator. That is the Arabic word. Islam is the Arabic word for that. And a person who makes this commitment to surrender to our Creator, that there is no one worthy of worship except Him alone, that person is Muslim. So it's not named after any particular tribe or a race or a person. It is the verb, it is the action we do to surrender ourselves to our Creator. So there's a profound, it's meaning, or you can say the feeling in it.
Thank you. Shaheen, one other question. With
Yes.
respect to your faith, so the difference between the Sunni and the Shia?
Yes.
And are there differences with respect to Ramadan and how the holy days are celebrated? No difference.
There's no difference because the Ramadan is, it's about, focus is to develop spiritual growth so we can come closer to our Creator and focus on our self-control to become a better person. And the Hajj is, all these things are obligatory on every Muslim. And Shias also follow the same Quran. There is no other Quran, there's just one Quran.
Thank you.
So it's, actually, I was fortunate enough to go on the pilgrimage 20 years ago, and in my group there were Shiite group, and I didn't know that, and I didn't even know that that was the Shiite group I was going with. So while the Hajj was over and we were coming back, so one of the ladies, she asked me, how did it feel? I said, about what? She said, oh, you were with the Shiite group. Oh. I didn't think about it. It was, wasn't any difference. So it's nothing, but it's very unfortunate that, we hear so much and things are political now. So, yeah, that was, thank you.
I'm much more familiar with the Judeo-Christian traditions, and I've found your discussion this evening very enlightening and interesting. And I feel as though there's a lot more similarities than I realized.
Yes,
Or that
definitely.
I was aware of in the past, of giving to others. In the Christian tradition, being Christ-like by giving what we have to others who are less fortunate. And I think that's certainly similar in the Jewish faith of
Right.
giving and sharing. And I feel as though that isn't really known. Or maybe that's our lack of understanding of the Muslim faith from what we hear in the media.
Yes, yes.
Could you respond to that?
I think, like, all of you gathering here, making an effort to come here, and leaders like Chris organizing this. We need more of these kind of gatherings so we can come to know our other, friends, our neighbors. It's very, very important, and we need to highlight positive stories. Positive stories. We need to change the narrative. How do we change the narrative? That you're all here, you can, when you hear from your friends or family gatherings, about Muslims, so we need to stand up and say, hey, no, this is not right. This is not how things are. I know, I went for this talk. So this really helps. So that's why I'm very grateful to Chris and all of you for making an effort to understand, because peace, which grows from understanding, is very, very important to get to know our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just briefly say that obviously the media has a lot to do with it, and because peace and understanding doesn't sell newspapers, maybe, right? We hear about the radicals and the extremists, right? And that's what the media tends to cover.
Yes.
And so perception is obviously skewed. Is that fair? Because of the media coverage.
Media coverage, and there are a lot of, there's a big Islamophobia industry, and their main purpose is to spread hate. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent, for this purpose. So so it's very unfortunate. I mean, if you think about it, Islamophobia is not going to go away anytime soon. It's not going to go away. So that's why it's important for us to, understand so we can make a difference.
Shaheen, I know you facilitate a monthly discussion group. Would you mention that maybe?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I have a few interfaith book group discussions, clubs which I started. And I started this one group at our mosque in Wayland after 9/11. And it has been going very well. Now we are doing like every 6 months big community discussions. And we are having like over 100 attendees and small group discussions. So this has been very helpful. And so it's good to have, there are mosques in, there's a mosque in Shrewsbury and there are 2 mosques in Worcester, and I know they have book clubs as well. So that is another way we can, Jewish, Muslim, and other all faiths of people can come together. So it's, and also last year, and Chris had invited me as well, I was doing a conversation with our neighbors, which, some of the libraries were sponsoring that. And the same series, I will be speaking in Holliston and in Framingham. So again, these opportunities are available, and hopefully, people will take advantage of that. And so we can do some little things, grassroots, efforts, whatever we can. Because we need to bridge the gap. We need to change the narrative, and also media doesn't want to air the positive stories. They always have, these negative things going on. So this would be helpful. And again, thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Steve?
I'll give my promo too.
Yeah.
Christmas Eve service. If any of you would like to do come to a traditional Christmas Eve service, where we'll read the Christmas stories. There are several passages from the prophecies in Isaiah and Micah, and the New Testament stories of the birth of Jesus. We'll have a Christmas Eve service at Rice Memorial at 6:30 on Christmas Eve. Rice Memorial is on Lincoln Street, right between Milliken and Lincoln Street School, 85 Lincoln Street, and we'll be starting at 6:30. We'll sing all the good old hymns out of the hymnal, and we'll have some special music as well, with harp and flute, I believe. So you're all invited to that. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause for Shaheen and Pastor Georgeson and Rabbi Gurvitz. And thank you so much for coming. Appreciate your attending and your support of the series. And I hope everyone has a happy holiday and stay warm. And we'll continue this, and perhaps we'll have another series in the spring. So thank you again. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank you all.